Good.
I am so glad you were all here today, and I know that we'll probably have a few more come on in a little bit. We are going to be delving into Isaiah 6 and maybe even into 7, depending on how far we go along. And Isaiah 6 is one that a lot of people know of and is kind of like Isaiah's charge. But before we begin, let's start with a word of prayer. Dear gracious God, we are so thankful that we can come together again today. Another week is near the halfway point here, and we just ask that we continue to be refreshed by your word, that you shine a light on a new piece of your character so that we can understand you a little bit more, Lord. Again, I want to thank you for each of those who are here with us tonight and for the fellowship that we have. We thank you and we love you. In Jesus' name, amen.
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 Now, before we start this, Ed, you got something, or were you just waving?
No, I was saying hi today.
Okay. Music doesn't go very well on Zoom, but there is a Christian recording artist from Memphis called Todd Agnew. I had the privilege of listening to him in concert when I lived down there. And he has a song that's the Isaiah 6 song. And I'm going to mute you ladies for just a minute. Charlene, it seems like there's some heavy breathing on there. Again, if you need to come off mute, it is, let me double check. For those on the phone, it is *6, or if you'd like to raise your hand, it's *9. But his song, Isaiah 6, is actually him singing the scriptures. So whenever I read, and it's like word for word, not just a song inspired by Isaiah 6. So whenever I read this, I hear it in his voice into the music. So if you get a chance, I encourage you to check it out. I'm sure it's up on YouTube somewhere. Isaiah 6 song by Todd Agnew. But could we have someone start with Isaiah 6, 1 through 8? Who would like to read those for us? Okay, Ed?
In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw in a vision the Lord sitting on the throne, high and exalted, with the train of his royal robe filling the most holy part of the temple. Above him, seraphim, heavenly beings stood. Each one had 6 wings. With 2 wings he covered his face. With 2 wings he covered his feet. And with 2 wings he flew. And one called out to another, saying, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is filled with his glory. And the foundations of the thresholds trembled at the voice of him who called out. And the temple was filling with smoke. Then I said, Woe is me, for I am ruined, because I am a man of ceremonial unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips. For my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Then one of the seraphim flew to me with a burning coal in his hand, which he had taken from the altar with tongs. He touched my mouth with it and said, Listen carefully. This has touched your lips. Your wickedness, your sin, your injustice, your wrongdoing is taken away, and your sin is atoned for and forgiven.
In verse 8.
What's that?
Verse 8 as well.
Oh,
Also.
oh yeah, okay. Mine stops there. It says Isaiah's commission next. Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send? And who will go for us? Then I said, Here am I, send me. And he said, Go and tell this people.
So we're going to stop there.
Yep.
Now, a lot of people, they only get to this part of the story, and they don't like the rest of it because it's not the rainbows and unicorns that we like. But is there anything in this that stands out to you? So King Uzziah was someone that Isaiah was very close to. So he is probably grieving and coming to God. And he's in the temple because he doesn't know where else to take his grief. I don't know if any of you have ever been in that situation before where you are just broken and hurting and you don't know anywhere else to take it. And so God's the only option.
Well, that must be pretty traumatic to have a seraphim fly over to you with a burning coal and touch your lips. Doesn't happen very often.
Right. And seraphim, they're quite different than what we think of when we think of the usual angels, right? We don't know exactly what they look like. Seraph means burning. So these are like burning ones. Some people have mistranslated it because that's also the same word for snake. So they're like, oh, there's this snake that's flying snake with hands and feet and wings, but that's not what it is. But it's this 6-winged burning one with hands and feet and eyes and all of that. And chances are it's probably pretty scary.
I would think so.
Yeah. Now, why would they cover their eyes? Where are they?
They don't want to see the face of God. They dare not see the face of God.
Right. So this is respect. This is holy. They know their place. Right?
They're in the most
Yeah.
holy place, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So with this, Isaiah is seen in the palace of heaven, using that mirrored with what he knows of the temple on earth, which is what we believe as well, that there is a temple in heaven and a temple on earth that it was modeled off of because Moses was given blueprints. Now, what are the seraphim saying to one another? Back and forth.
Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts, and the whole earth is filled with his glory.
Don't they already know that? Why are they telling that to one another?
They're praising him and letting everybody else know.
Right. One thing that I thought was kind of cool, and some verses or some versions might show this, some don't. When Isaiah realizes what's going on and he says, "Woe to me, I'm ruined." That word ruined also means struck silent. So he's just in such awe, he can't speak. So then it's, I can't speak because my lips are unclean. I'm just in such awe. I know that I don't deserve to be here. But how did Isaiah get reassured that he was in the right place and that vision from God was not a mistake? What happened?
All his wrongdoing was forgiven.
Right. So he realized that he's mourning the death of one king, right? And he then sees the greatest king of all, the Lord Almighty. And it is that king, the Lord of hosts, who can take away our sin and our guilt and atone for it. Notice it doesn't say, hey, Isaiah, you've atoned for your sin, does it? No, it's your sin has been atoned for and taken away from you, which is very different.
Why do you think it was, why did he put the coal to his lips?
So there is a note in my Bible that notes that on the Day of Atonement, coals of fire were used by the high priest in the most holy place, which is when the high priest would then atone for their own sins. So it's seeing the symbolism there. And the idea of his lips also being branded for God. Let me pull real quick and see what one of my Jewish commentaries says, if it makes mention of anything. Not really, just showing that kind of the parallel between this burning one, the seraphim, this burning one, bringing a burning coal. So he was the messenger of burning. That's kind of where that
My
one.
footnote says that there was no, it symbolized that the cure was not going to be painless. It wasn't a painless cure for sin.
Exactly. And we know too that this was hot because it was this burning one, the seraphim, didn't take the coal in their hands. They needed the tongs to carry this burning coal.
Christy, I've got a question. See if you know the answer. It says the temple was filling with smoke. What is the symbolism for that? What does that mean?
I don't know. For the smoke, it could be, what does smoke symbolize in the temple?
Incense.
So there's the incense, which is prayers going up.
Yeah.
But what else burned in the temple? The sacrifices,
Sacrifice.
which were a pleasing scent. So the idea that is it. There's also some people will connect it with the seraphim song, the earth is filled with his glory, so the smoke can be symbolic of God's glory, which we as humans cannot see in its fullness. So it has to be, has to have some sort of buffer. Because remember, when Isaiah is first seeing there, God is on the throne, high and lifted up, so it's distant. And then he gets close enough to actually hear. After the experience with the coal, he now is overhearing this conversation of the Lord saying, "Who shall I send?" So it could be a buffer as well to help with shielding him from God's glory.
So before
Yeah.
it sounded like an earthquake happened. The thresholds of the temple shook, trembled.
This, I think of when, when Moses was up on the mountain in communion with God, and he asked God if he could see his face, and God said, I can't do that. It would destroy. Essentially, it would destroy you. But I can show you my hinder parts. But this is. It's interesting that the seraphim are in that same situation a little bit. That it implies that they still have something that needs to be revealed to them before they can fully receive God's glory. And the coal would seem to me that where does the coal come from? It's from God. God, the essentially from God, from His flame, from His and He's His glory has filled this area, and everything's hot. Everything's hot. The coal must have come from Him. He was that source. I think that, and the smoke, I think, that's the way I perceive it, is that all of that is coming from Him. His purifying glory, which is so intense for anyone that's anyone that's surrounded by sin.
I was going to say the same thing, David. Anyone who's a sinner, and that's all of us.
Right, and also there's a deterrent, right? because
Yeah.
an earthquake usually leaves debris and there's
Yeah.
this smoke. So it's the idea of there's this barrier between us and God when it comes to us being able to see God's glory. So once the sin is atoned for on behalf of Isaiah, Isaiah hears God saying, "Whom shall I send? Who will go for us?" So there's a couple feelings in here too where you get the idea of God being one but many, right? A triune God who will go for us. Holy, holy, holy.
Hmm.
And
Wow.
Isaiah volunteers. A lot of times when God calls people, he does not give them the option to volunteer. Think of Moses, right? Did Moses volunteer
Oh,
for
he
this
asked for his
harassing
brother
job?
to go.
No, he's like, can you please take anybody else?
Well, he sort of volunteered before God was ready for him.
Mm-hmm.
And then God says, hold on a second. We have, well, no, not a second. Hold on for 40 years and then we work this out.
Right. So God wants willing people. And this was not going to be an easy task because God now says, all right, you're ready to go for me? Let's go and see what that's going to look like. And this is kind of the part that we don't always include when we talk about Isaiah being his commissioning or his starting into ministry. And so who would like to read verses 9 through 13? This kind of, there's this back and forth between God and Isaiah.
I could do that.
Thanks, Dave.
And he said, "Go and tell this people, keep on hearing, but do not understand. Keep on seeing, but do not perceive. Make the heart of this people dull and their ears heavy, and shut their eyes, lest they see with their eyes, and hear with their ears, and understand with their heart, and return and be healed." Then I said, "Lord, how long?" And he answered, "Until the cities are laid waste and without inhabitant. The houses are without a man, and the land is utterly desolate. The Lord has removed men far away, and the forsaken places are many in the midst of the land. But yet a tenth will be in it, and will return and be for consuming, as a terebinth tree or as an oak, whose stump remains when it is cut down. So the holy seed shall be its stump."
Does that sound like a job anybody wants?
You know, I'm not, with the track record of Israel through the Bible,
Mm-hmm.
and we're supposed to be the modern Israel, we don't have a very good track record at any age during when Christ's trying to take care of us or trying to lead us.
Now, it talks about in verse 9 that people are going to be ever hearing and never understanding, that they'd see and they not perceive. Is this something where, because it says later, because if they see, if they might understand, they might see, and they might turn their hearts. Is this God saying, I'm going to make it so there's no way that they can comprehend what's going on? Or is God saying, because
No.
there's the statute of the status of their lives, they will not be able to? So is this descriptive or prescriptive of the people?
Yeah, this was something that I believe was the way that they understood God's character to be at that time. And so there here you see the Lord meeting them where they are. He's explaining it in a way that they can understand. But I really what it is, and God makes it clear as when you continue to read on through all these things, you see his character with more clarity in all of these things. But I like this. I like, in verse 11, he says, Lord, how long? He's that, that's part of the conversion process when he, he's like, God, it's not like you to do something like this. He sees, Lord, how long would you do this to your people? That's the way I read that. He recognizes, because he's so close to the Lord at this point. He recognizes that the love that the Lord has for them, and he's like, it doesn't make sense, Lord. How long, Lord?
Well, the part that they won't catch on reminds me of the Pharisees and the priests during Jesus' time. They just, no matter what he said to them, they didn't get it.
He quoted this to them. So yeah, Jesus does a direct quote of this part of Isaiah to the people of his day. He's like, this is why I have to talk in parables. Because if I made it plain, you still wouldn't get it. And we're trying to have you get it. Isaiah, when he realized how sinful he was, he noticed it wasn't just him, but it was the people as well, right? I live among people of unclean lips. So they weren't ready to understand. I equate it to the idea, going back to the Exodus again, and Pharaoh, and it says that God hardened Pharaoh's heart so that the plagues would keep going on. Does that mean that God wanted all that pain and suffering? Is God a puppet master? I like the example I've heard of hot water, boiling water. You can put an egg in boiling water and a potato in boiling water, and it's going to have two very different responses. The egg will get hard, the potato will get soft, but it's not the fault of the water. It's the substance.
It's what your heart has become. What you nurture your heart to become. Either something that is that will melt like butter when it's exposed to the truth, or something that will harden like clay.
Well, if I'm in this group of people that is talked about in this chapter, I want to be a stump.
Mm-hmm. Because there is hope for these people, because if they could understand with their hearts, which their heart, their mind, the same idea there, if they really understood, they would turn and be healed if they weren't caught up in themselves. And there is a group, this remnant, that will kind of grow up and still be around. The stump idea, the idea of there is still growth possible when everything else seems like it's wiped out.
A tenth remain in the land, huh? I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
In the Amplified Bible, the last verse, it ends with, the holy seed, the elect remnant, is its stump, the substance of Israel.
So now there's a couple different ways to look at this. The holy seed will be the stump in the land. So the idea of it being the remnant of the people, God's people. But what else do we think of as a holy seed? What was Eve promised?
Oh, somebody to come back and take care of Lucifer.
Right.
Somebody
and again,
in your lineage.
Right, and it's the same word, seed, semen, seed, all the same word, all means there. So there is still hope, which when everything's crumbling around you, when everything is laid waste, there is still reason to hope. Because that promise that was made at the beginning of time for Earth and the beginning of our new reality of sin, that hope continues to carry through.
Thank goodness.
Mm-hmm. That's pretty awesome.
Amen.
There are some days that's all I have to cling to. Because I look outside and it ain't pretty. You know, I look in our church and it ain't pretty. Whenever I look to someone else, it ain't pretty. And when I look in the mirror half the time, it ain't pretty either. So it's that hope that it's not the end.
Mhm.
All right, any thoughts there? Any more thoughts on that before we hop into chapter 7? I'll add.
At least for my,
Go ahead, Susan. Susan,
of
go
what was
ahead.
to come. Well, we have proof of that he died for our sins. We know it. I mean, it's already happened, and I don't find myself a whole lot different than those people in my nature.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And that was going to be my closing thought is, so Isaiah knew that he wasn't up to the task on his own. He knew that he didn't have what it takes, but he also knew that God could still use him.
Mm.
I don't know anyone who's up to the task, but I know a lot of people that God can use.
I was just going to say, nobody that God uses is up for the task, and they know it. That's why they can be used.
Right. And even Jesus didn't want to have to be up to the task.
Mhm.
Right?
It's true. Brings to mind the phrase that he doesn't call the qualified, he qualifies the called.
Oh, I like that.
Mm-hmm. So that's another reason to have hope, right?
Amen.
That we are not defined by our faultiness. And maybe we need to have a little bit more grace with ourselves. All right, chapter 7 picks up during a period of war. It's called the Syro-Ephraimite War. They also talk about it in 2 Kings and 1 Chronicles, and that's kind of where this is going on. And in here we get some more prophecies leading up to Jesus. And this puts us right back in. Uzziah is dead. His grandson is taking over. And so who would like to start us off with 7? And we'll do 1 through 9.
I could do that.
Thanks, Karen.
Excuse me. Now it came to pass in the days of Ahaz, the son of Jotham, the son of Uzziah, king of Judah, that Rezin, king of Syria, and Pekah, the son of Remaliah, king of Israel, went up to Jerusalem to make war against it, but could not prevail against it. And it was told to the house of David, saying, Syria's forces are deployed in Ephraim. So his heart and the heart of his people were moved as the trees of the woods are moved with the wind. Then the Lord said to Isaiah, Go out now to meet Ahaz, you and Shear-Jashub your son, at the end of the aqueduct from the upper pool, on the highway to the fuller's field, and say to him, Take heed and be quiet. Do not fear or be faint-hearted, for these 2 stubs of smoking firebrands, for the fierce anger of Rezin and Syria, and the son of Remaliah. Because Syria Ephraim and the son of Remaliah have plotted evil against you, saying, let us go up against Judah and trouble it, and let us make a gap in its wall for ourselves, and set a king over them, the son of Tabor. Thus says the Lord God, it shall not stand, nor shall it come to pass. For the head of Syria is Damascus, and the head of Damascus is Rezin. Within 65 years, Ephraim will be broken, so that it will not be a people. The head of Ephraim is Samaria, and the head of Samaria is Remaliah's son. If you will not believe, surely you shall not be established.
Kind of rough, right?
Yeah.
God doesn't take very well to people who are not authorized to come among his people, right? You aren't anything but a couple of blazing fire sticks. Know your place. Because they were shaking in the wind. One thing that's interesting to note, Isaiah's son, his name means a remnant will return.
Mm.
Mhm.
So sometimes when you can't remember, or you're worried that you're going to be hopeless, and everything around you looks hopeless, you make a permanent reminder for yourself that a remnant will return, right? And also, names were extremely important. So it's not a coincidence that this is Isaiah's son's name.
Mm.
This is part of the Israel is split now,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
And part of it is warring against the other one, trying to take it over.
Right.
And they've tried to join forces with Syria to accomplish that. That's what this is talking about, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because sometimes when we're scared, we don't always make the right alliances in our lives, right?
Mhm.
And so we see that quite often Israel didn't make the right alliances because they were scared. They didn't trust. And to me, that goes back to the end of verse 9, where Isaiah is reminding us, if you don't stand firm in your faith, you're not going to stand at all.
Mm.
Because notice it says, Ephraim, at verse 9, Ephraim, that's supposed to be God's land, God's people. Ephraim was one of the sons of Joseph, so these are part of the tribes. But the head of Ephraim is not God. The head of Ephraim is Samaria.
Mhm.
Mm.
So let's go on and see what God asked them to do.
Well, just a second.
Yep.
On the directions the Lord gave to Isaiah, that's really interesting how precise he was about where to go and what he was going to find. And as we were reading through there, I wasn't sure what a fuller's field was. Does anybody besides you know? Or do you know?
Mine calls it a washerman's field.
Yeah, it's a place where they lay the clothes out to dry.
Hmm.
That's pretty interesting. But if you look at just the exact place, and he talks about the 2 stumps and smoldering logs.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
A lot of detail.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying,
Yeah.
Which is interesting. Again, because there's so much detail, it should, for us, be a validation that God is working and that God is giving this to Isaiah. But for many scholars, they say there's too much detail. God never could have done this. And so this has to have been written after the fact.
Yeah.
Mm.
And then other places they talk about parting the Red Sea, and they make up, this nature could have had that. It didn't need God. You know, they go both ways, wherever they need to go.
It goes back to, you'll see it and you'll not believe it, and you'll hear it and you'll not believe it.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
But we're going to make it as plain as we can. And it's not God's fault that we don't quite get it. So let's do the rest of this, 10 through 25.
I can do that.
Thanks, Jill.
Moreover, the Lord spoke again to Ahaz, saying, Ask a sign for yourself from the Lord your God. Ask it either in the depth or in the height above. But Ahaz said, I will not ask, nor will I test the Lord. Then he said, Hear now, O house of David, is it a small thing for you to weary men, but you will weary my God also? Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. Curds and honey he shall eat, that he may know to refuse the evil and choose the good. For behold, the child shall know how to for before the child shall know to refuse the evil and choose the good, the land that you dread will be forsaken by both her kings. The Lord will bring the king of Assyria upon you and your people and your father's house, days that have not come since the day that Ephraim departed from Judah. And it shall come to pass in that day that the Lord will whistle for the fly that is in the farthest part of the rivers of Egypt, and for the bee that is in the land of Assyria. They will come, and all of them will rest in the desolate valleys and in the clefts of the rocks, and on all thorns and in all pastures. In the same day the Lord will shave with a hired razor, with those from beyond the river, with the king of Assyria, the head and the hair of the legs, and will also remove the beard. It shall be in that day that a man will keep alive a young cow and 2 sheep. So it shall be from the abundance of milk they give, that he will eat curds. For curds and honey everyone will eat who is left in the land. It shall happen in that day that wherever there could be 1,000 vines worth 1,000 shekels of silver, it will be for briars and thorns. With arrows and bows, men will come there, because all the land will become briars and thorns. And to any hill which could be dug with the hoe, you will not go there for fear of briars and thorns, but it will become a range for oxen and a place for sheep to roam.
Well, I wouldn't want to be one of those cows to have to eat briars and thorns.
So this is kind of one of those dual prophecies again, where it's talking about directly to King Ahaz about things that are going to happen right away in his lifetime, as well as looking forward.
Mhm.
So right in his, I think it's interesting. You know, we're often told not to be presumptuous, not to, like Ahaz, we're like, you know what, I'm not going to ask for a sign. I trust God. It's all going to work out. But God's saying, ask me for a sign. And he's like, nope, God, I don't need to listen to you there because I'm listening to you.
Mhm.
In the Amplified Bible, it, part of the parentheses is ask a sign for yourself from the Lord your God, one that will convince you that God has spoken and will keep his word.
Right, and it could be anything. He could have like just asked for a sign in his heart, or like shouted it from
Yeah.
the rooftops. But he's like, no.
Make it anything you want. Just make it something that you'll believe.
Right. And so now it's not that great of a sign. The sign is there'll be this child whose name means God with us.
That's pretty bad when the Lord tells you to do something and Ahaz says, no, I can't do that.
Right. And so then God's like, look, it's not enough that you frustrate men. You now want to and frustrate the rest of the world. Now you're going to frustrate me? Come on, please. I'm trying to have this connection with you and you won't let me. You've put up a block. And I wonder, are there times when we should be saying, God, I need to see your hand in this, and we don't? Are we depriving ourselves sometimes?
It
I can
just
do it
seems to
myself,
me
God.
that
Go ahead, Susan, and then Ed.
I'm sorry, Ed, that
That's okay.
God was trying to lift him up. He was resisting, and I see that today. I mean, I look around, and clearly these are the end times. If they're not, I really missed the boat. But it's, I get mired down in it, and I feel that every now and then he just squeezes a sign in against my will to lift me up. Do you not experience that?
I do sometimes. There's sometimes I'm really frustrated, and I'll be honest, there's some days where I'm like, you know what, I just shouldn't be here. I need to quit. I need to go do something else, go bury my head in the sand somewhere. And
Oh,
then and then God's like, nope, this is why you're here. Something that I wasn't even expecting.
Yeah, I was gonna say sometimes you get blindsided by something. And it's like, oh my goodness, it's like it kind of resets your gauge just a little bit. You weren't
Yeah.
looking for
Yeah.
it or anything, but it's powerful enough that you get it. You get what it is. It's like, oh wow.
And it speaks to how how God deals with each of us individually. He knows exactly what we need. There's and why we're doing certain things that we're doing, and why we may not be doing certain things that we should, and he always comes up with a way to gently nudge us back into a place where we can receive his love.
Mm.
But
Gently nudge us.
well, relatively speaking, because at the moment it doesn't feel like a gentle nudge. But when we look back, we say, wow, that could have gone a lot worse than I expected.
That's
I
true.
agree.
Now we see in part of the sign something that would normally be thought of as good, that is actually a sign that things are not so good. We think of, when Israel was told they were going into the promised land, it was going to be a land of milk and honey, right? So this is this good thing. There's going to be food already readily available for you. You're not going to have to work hard for it. And talking about this child eating curds and honey, it's not because they were so wealthy. It's because the land, which they were agricultural, they wanted to farm, was destroyed. So they had no other choice but to eat what God had provided through the honey and the curds. So sometimes just because it looks like somebody has it made, maybe there's a little bit of barrenness and wilderness and desert in their lives. My Bible notes as well, when you're looking at this literally for King Ahaz, not the secondary prophecy, it says when this child this child's going to be born, and before they reach the age of knowing right or wrong, so that would have been like 12, 13 years old when he would have gotten bat mitzvahed, then all this is going to happen. But really it only took 2 years for the country to be laid waste and have Israel plundered.
So the phrase in verse 16, the land that you dread will be forsaken by both her kings.
Mm-hmm.
Which, is that talking about Israel?
So, yep. Both Aram and Israel would be plundered.
Both Judah and Israel.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep. And so sometimes we think we have a long time to wait. I think of those times I had these warnings in high school, and high school has been a long time. Longer for some than others. Where it's like, people are like, oh, don't be that person who needs to go sow their wild oats before they come back to God because you never know how much time you have left. Kind of this idea. They said it could take up to 13 years, but within 2 years, it was over. We never have as much time as we think we need.
True.
The other thing this brings up, the idea of men being shaven against their will. We talked about this at another point, I think earlier, where this was humiliation and embarrassment. So
Yeah.
shave their head, and hair of their legs is actually a euphemism for their pubic hair. So completely shaved. Shave your beard. Remember, we don't have as much of this here in the US as there are in some other countries, although I think there is still a fair share of this in Adventism, this whole honor shame society, and the idea of you don't want to bring shame onto your family. That can be, in some cultures even today, bringing shame on your family is something worth killing for or dying for. And so God is telling them that, you know what? God's going to make sure that there will be embarrassment. So,
Christy, thank you for admitting that you see it even in the SDA. I think, in any extreme, I have no fear of Muslims. I would love to have Muslim neighbors because I like their food. But when you get into the extremism, as you do with Judaism, and in fact, she called me today, a very dear friend, and her husband was a good friend of mine too, and our kids played together. And it was a black man and was diagnosed with high blood pressure and decided to follow what he said was the Adventist way. He fasted for 2 weeks and he wound up with a massive stroke and died.
Oh, wow.
And any extreme. And I think that, looking at what happened on the cross, I think my forgiveness includes wiggle room for making mistakes and sinning, but I don't want the extreme. I don't want the extreme diet. I don't want this extreme on Sabbath where you can't pick up a Kleenex, that you tie a handkerchief around your wrist and do what we did in Judaism, where all the toilet paper was torn off and folded on Friday afternoon, because tearing it and then folding it on Sabbath was work. So I think God gives us room for moderation. So Christy, thanks for mentioning that.
well, I think it's very important because you can get to a point where following the rules, whatever they are, becomes your religion.
Yes.
And you miss
It's easier
God.
to do it that way. That's my sin nature makes that more appealing to me than accepting grace.
Oh yeah, it's so much easier to
Than
follow
admitting that I can't do it myself.
Right, or to follow this check sheet so I don't have to critically think and make these decisions. It makes it super easy. And it also makes it super easy for us to judge someone else based on what we've said fits into that check sheet of what's right or wrong.
Yeah, what we see.
And there's so much that we don't see. So someone can look all rosy and peachy and perfect, but you have no idea what's under that lid when you pull back. So it's very easy to put up a front when you do go to those extreme worrying about appearances and check sheets.
I feel better.
But I think we're in good company because apparently this has been a problem for generations upon generations of people.
Well, and you see it I mean, not only in in the religious aspect, but you see it just in general in our population. You know, when um, somebody's been killed or somebody's been living with abuse, you know, people come out of the woodwork and they say, you know, we had no idea. You know, and
Yeah.
we've become a society that's very good at covering up and only telling what, you know, we want people to know or whatever too. So not just in the religious aspect per se, but we're just very good at trying to look at what's acceptable.
Right.
Yeah.
We've almost become masters at masking.
So some people have, not everybody can,
Yeah.
but a lot of people have. That's very,
Mhm.
very true.
One of the one of the things I've run into over the years is if you're too open about things, people freak out.
Well, now that's
Because
true.
they say, whoa, 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 I wasn't ready for that.
Yeah, don't know quite where to go with that, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And also, we're a part of, at least a part of me, you know, we want to fix things. And some things are so wacko, it's like you don't even know where to start. And it's just overwhelming at times, you know, and it's not fixable with an easy fix. A lot of things are not, you know, and a lot of the fixes are kind of painful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, my something that I've prayed a lot about, you know, over the last several years, or is that, you know, for the Lord to shine a light in every corner of my mind, you know, every hidden thing, every, you know, and bring it to light for me, so that I can allow Him to work on those things, you know.
That's a dangerous
And that
prayer because that
it's
gets answered.
it's very dangerous. It's dangerous in the sense that you know, it can be very scary, but it's not in the
Yeah.
reality. It's not that, you know, it's exactly what, you know, I think what we should be praying for. But it is it's like standing on the edge of a cliff, you know.
And I think the amazing thing about God, when we say those prayers, He doesn't shine a light on everything at once.
Bless him.
So it's incremental journeys,
Hmm,
just what we can handle
true.
with God's help.
Yeah.
All right. Any last thoughts on this bit of Isaiah? We'll keep going. 8 and 9 is one that we read a lot at Christmas time. Deals again with child will be born. But the
If
next,
you want to break out in song, but we're not supposed to sing.
right. Well, as I said, chapter 6, the first part of it makes me want to break out in song. There's, I don't know if you were here when I was mentioning it, Todd Agnew. He's a Christian recording artist from Memphis, and he has a song that is word for word Isaiah 6. It's not inspired by it, is. So I hear him singing it into that tune whenever I read this, the Isaiah 6 song. So if you get a chance, watch it on YouTube. But it always lifts me up when I hear it.
So my favorite verse in this chapter is 14.
Read it for us.
Therefore, the Lord himself will give you a sign. Listen carefully. The virgin will conceive and give a birth to a son, and she shall call his name Emmanuel, God with us.
Mm-hmm.
Who would we rather have with us?
Right. And again, names were not taken lightly, especially if God is naming someone. So the name itself is a prophecy that God will be with you. So again, when everything else is going to pot around you, God is with you.
Mm.
Pretty amazing
Yeah,
stuff. Go ahead, Susan.
I would think that that would just be that wonderful, wonderful verse would have been incomprehensible to the people in that day because they didn't realize that God was approachable. You know, there was a Holy of Holies that only the high priest went into, and there was all these machinations, and they had no concept of seeing God, touching God, feeling God, or knowing God.
Exactly.
So I think it was really radical. What?
Yes, exactly. This is a new way that God is trying to connect with them. Because God tries to connect with us any way that can be done, right? There's not only one way, which I'm so thankful for. Because, I don't know, but I'm not the same person as Ed or Sophia or Jill. So God's going to need to talk to me and connect with me slightly differently. And the opportunities are going to be different because I don't live their lives. So I'm grateful that God is not limited.
One of the things about that is that always that gives me the chills when I think about that is that when you look at all the different ways that he, connects with all his different children, it makes you realize that he so values our individuality, and that always just it just makes me feel so good because I love individuality. I love the fact that we all can be our own persons, and you can hear it so many times that people so a lot of times Christians or will say that it's dangerous. It's dangerous to want to be your own. That's not how God intended. But it's the exact opposite. I mean, because if it wasn't the case, He would treat us all the same.
Yeah.
Right. We're not like those subdivisions that are all cookie cutter houses and everything's the same.
Wouldn't it be so boring if everybody were the same? I mean, who could you talk to? Because they'd say the same thing you're going to say anyway.
Occasionally, I'd like everybody to think the way that I think, but then I know that they'd be just as stubborn as I am, and so it really wouldn't work in the long run.
Part of what you're saying, David, made me think of God cares so much for us. Things that we don't even worry about, he knows about, like the very hairs of our head are numbered. And when I see one in the sink, I said, I wonder what number that was.
Well, yeah, I counted your hairs at church the other day, Ed.
He had an extra minute. It's a wonderful thing. All right, well, I'm going to stop us recording so we can have our prayer.